is the English translation of the YouTube script. Hey there! Today, I've got some nice, laid-back Japanese local ghost stories for you. Alright, let's get started. So, I have this Japanese friend. I picked out some of the scarier stories I heard from her. This friend is from the outskirts of Tokyo, and she still lives in Japan. When I was little, I followed my parents on a business trip to Japan. And that's how I met her. She was the child of someone from the partner company. It's funny, because usually when you meet through your parents' work, it's just a one-time thing. But even as kids who couldn't speak each other's language, we just clicked somehow. We kept in touch over the years. And after becoming adults, we'd visit each other and travel together. We're pretty close. Her name is Naomi. Naomi isn't really into ghost stories. But the moment she drinks, she starts spilling all these scary tales. Me, on the other hand, I love creepy, bizarre stories. Especially ones from Japan or Thailand that give off that really eerie vibe. I can't get enough of them. Anyway, the stories I'm about to tell you are from Naomi. And they're the kind that leave you feeling uneasy, with a really unsettling aftertaste. Some are things Naomi experienced herself. Some are stories floating around Japanese online communities. And some are mixed in from friends or acquaintances. So I can't guarantee their authenticity. But isn't that the whole point of listening to ghost stories? I just hope you enjoy them. The first story is something Naomi experienced herself. When she was in college, she spent a holiday at her grandmother's house. What happened there? Her grandmother's house was one of those old wooden houses you see a lot in Japan. Even though her grandmother lived alone, there were a lot of empty rooms on the second floor. So family members would often visit and stay over. But the problem was the room at the very end of the second floor. Ever since she was little, whenever they visited her grandmother, no one ever went into that room. And all the adults in the family, without exception, would strictly warn them, that room at the end of the second floor is not in use. You must never open it. But the reason why was always left out. It was just a room you don't open. A room that's supposed to stay closed. That was the general idea. It was strange, but apparently in Japan, unlike where we're from, spaces like that aren't uncommon. Like if they have an altar set up inside, they tell the kids it's an unused room to keep them from messing around. Naomi was curious, but she didn't think much of it. But when she became a college student, she went to stay at her grandmother's house alone. Not with the whole family. So with only her grandmother in the house. The nights were dead silent. She'd never really thought about it before. But that was the first time the silence of the house hit her so hard. Just the hum of a few appliances like the refrigerator. And the occasional creaking of the old wooden house stretching. That was all she should have heard. But then from the second floor, creak. The sound of a door opening. This wasn't the sound of a house settling. It was the distinct sound of someone physically opening a door. But her grandmother was asleep in the master bedroom. and Naomi was downstairs in the living room. So who on earth opened the door on the second floor? Thinking it might be a burglar, Naomi rushed upstairs quickly. But trying not to be noticed, she crept up the stairs and saw that the door to the room they were never supposed to open was slightly ajar, and through that crack she could see inside the room. And in that moment, a chill ran down her spine. Through the slightly open crack, she saw that the entire wall was a mirror. And reflected in that mirror, the room on the opposite side had no furniture at all. But what made Naomi feel that creeping dread wasn't that. She saw someone standing in that mirror-only room. And it was her grandmother. So startled, she quickly hid behind the wall. Then peeked out again carefully, and saw that it was slightly different from her actual grandmother. First, the expression was completely blank and emotionless. The eyes looked incredibly tired, with dark circles drawn deep underneath. The body looked much thinner than in real life, and her back was hunched over terribly. Then she felt the grandmother in the mirror looking at her. So she quickly hid again. Soon after, she heard the door slam shut with a asterisk bang. So shocked, she ran downstairs in one breath. She didn't even know what she'd seen, and the situation made no sense. So she stayed up all night with her eyes wide open. Then, as soon as morning came and the sun rose, she went back upstairs to check. She crept up to the top of the stairs and peeked. And the door was closed. It was so unsettling. They said you must never open that room. Yet it had been opened the night before. And even though her grandmother had clearly been sleeping in her room, she'd seen her in that room too. So she waited for her grandmother to wake up, and asked her right away. Her grandmother hesitated for a long time, and finally spoke. The person who appears in that room's mirror will die soon. Seeing Naomi's bewildered expression, she added, "If the face in the mirror looks the same as now, there's still time left. But if it looks different from usual, then it's already too late to do anything." At those words, Naomi recalled the face she'd seen in the mirror. Her grandmother, looking so exhausted, so thin. Her body hunched over as far as it could go. But she was afraid of frightening her grandmother too much. So she never told her what she'd seen. In the end, Naomi kept it to herself until she went home after the holiday ended. And that winter, she received news of her grandmother's passing. After the funeral, while they were all cleaning out the grandmother's house, they finally opened that room. But where the mirror had been, nothing was reflected anymore. No, the mirror was definitely still there. But it didn't reflect anything. The rest of the family seemed almost relieved, saying the mirror must have lost its function. Well, of course. Who would want to keep looking at a mirror that shows you who's going to die next? Since they all lived in the city, and the grandmother's house was quite far out, there was no one to manage it. So they put the house up for sale. And apparently it sold quickly, with the mirror still attached to the wall, just as it was. They probably figured it was fine now, since it couldn't function as a mirror anymore. But I wonder if that mirror ever decides to reflect someone again. What will happen to the person who bought that house, knowing nothing? It might seem like a pretty simple story, but ever since I heard it, every mirror in my house has been on my mind. The second story is about a floor that doesn't exist. This one is from when I went to Japan. A friend called some old classmates to hang out, and one of them told this story. He swore up and down that this was 100% real. So here we go. Naoto got a job right after graduating from college. He started working at an office building, a little ways out from downtown Tokyo. It was built in the 90s but apparently well maintained. Just your typical gray building? 2 elevators. Floors from basement 1 to floor 10. A decent-sized mid-rise office building. But shortly after he started, the senior employees told him something. Never take the elevator alone. So Naoto asked, "But what if I'm working late and leaving alone?" Quote, and they told him in that case, take the stairs. There was no proper reason given. So Naoto couldn't tell if this was real, or if they were just hazing the new guy. Anyway, a few days passed. And finally, there was a day he couldn't avoid working late. And of course, it was a Friday. So he was the only one left. He'd even missed the last train. So it was taxi time. Almost midnight. Dead tired. He waited for the elevator without thinking. Who else would be there? No one. But when the elevator doors opened, and he saw the empty interior, he remembered what the seniors had said. He felt uneasy for no reason, and thought about just walking. But when he checked the time, he really didn't want to. After working his ass off late into the night, the thought of taking the stairs was suffocating. Ah, screw it, he thought, and got on. Surprisingly, nothing happened, and he arrived at the first floor. But the problem was, he'd left his phone in the office. If the next day had been a weekday, he would have just left it. But it was Friday. Who wants to come into the office over the golden weekend? He got back in the elevator. And when he looked at the button panel, there was a button he'd never seen before. If Naoto's office was on the 5th floor, between 4 and 5, there was a button that looked like a 5. But the number was so worn, he couldn't be sure. Naoto figured he must have just not noticed before, and that it must be his floor. So he pressed it. Then, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor. The numbers on the elevator display changed one by one. Then suddenly, the speed slowed down, and with no number showing on the display, it stopped. And with a asterisk ding, the doors opened. Wanting to find his phone quickly, he got off with quick steps, but felt something off. When he'd left earlier, since he was the last one, almost all the lights were off. But now, the office lights were all on. However, still no one was there. The desks and stacks of documents were as they were, and the computer screens were all turned off. But the feeling of the air was strange. Like a building that had been empty for a long time. Dusty. Stuffy smell? That's what he felt. Slightly on edge. He walked to his desk, when suddenly from the supposedly empty office, tap 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 tap, the sound of someone typing on a keyboard started. And it seemed to be coming from the closed conference room in the back. He crept over and peeked through the glass door. About 6 people in suits, heads bowed, typing away. What the? He thought maybe mid to upper management was having some kind of meeting. Then, as if sensing his presence, one of them looked up. There should definitely have been a face there, but where the eyes should be, the skin was deeply sunken in, and inside, blood-soaked flesh was twitching slightly in the empty eye sockets. Something that still seemed to have life was attached. The nose was broken in the middle, pressed inward, and with every breath, that part would swell and deflate. And finally, where the lips should be, skin was stuck to skin. He saw what looked like messy suture marks. And between those lines, yellowish fluid, something like a heart, was dripping out, when that thing that had noticed him forced its mouth open as if trying to say something. Those suture marks tore apart, and inside the mouth, layers of unidentified flesh were rolled up. There were no teeth at all. Just neglected gums turned black, wobbling, and shaking, even though it seemed in no state to speak. When it opened its mouth, the rest of them all looked at Naoto at once. Even though they clearly had no eyes, he felt 6 pairs of gazes on him. They all had messed up faces. Some had deep nail marks carved into where their eyes should be. Others had skin around their mouths, stretched out so much that leather-like flaps hung down like a basset hound's jowls. What snapped Naoto out of his frozen terror was, ironically, the sound of the elevator arriving. With a asterisk ding, he came to his senses and ran like crazy, jumping into that elevator with its doors open. Afraid they might follow, he frantically pressed the close button to shut the doors. After the elevator doors closed, without him pressing anything, it automatically headed to the first floor. When he arrived at the first floor lobby and checked the time, it was still before midnight. The time he'd spent upstairs felt like an eternity, but it had only been a few minutes. Oh, and when he got off, he looked to press the first floor button, but the ambiguous button between 4 and 5 had disappeared. His friend made it home safely, and over the weekend, he intensely searched for accidents related to that office building. Eventually, he found one news article about a fire. Turns out, the building originally had floors up to 11. But there was a fire in the past. And on what used to be the 5th floor, there was a concentrated number of fatalities. Since they couldn't demolish the whole building, they completely closed off that one floor and replaced all the elevators. But strangely, late at night, when passengers were alone, the elevator would keep going to that floor. In the end, Naoto quit his job shortly after. What he'd seen that day was too horrific to endure. Even now, He says he sometimes dreams about elevators. Without pressing any button. Arriving somewhere. Hearing the sound of typing. And then, soon hearing someone's voice as he wakes up. Hey, that sound. I can't help but think that because they failed to take him that day, they keep trying in his dreams. And the third story is The Curse of the Rainy Day. This is a story Naomi heard from another friend, who later said she saw the same story online too. So the source might ultimately be the internet. There's this Japanese internet legend about a road that only appears when it rains. You can't find it on phone maps or navigation. But when it rains, that road appears. When the weather clears, it vanishes without a trace. And if you pass through that road on a rainy day, you can have one thing you wish for. And the price you pay is losing something very important. There are a few versions, but online, most end in death. But the story her friend heard was a bit different. The thing you lose isn't something visible or clear. There was an office worker heading home after overtime. It was raining steadily, and even with an umbrella, the hems of his pants were getting splashed. That day, his usual route was blocked for construction. So he had to detour through a narrow alley he didn't normally take. But at the end of that alley, there was a road he'd never seen before. The strange thing was, even though he'd never seen it, he didn't feel unfamiliar with it at all. It felt like a road that had always been there. The pavement looked old, cracked in places, and the streetlights were sparse. As he crossed that road, instead of the sound of rain, he heard what sounded like footsteps following him from behind. But when he turned around, there was no one. With an uneasy mind, he quickened his pace. And the moment he reached the end of the road, a sudden, inexplicable peace washed over him. The fatigue, frustration, irritation, and setbacks accumulated that day. All the negative emotions felt washed away by the rain. He'd never felt so good. When he got home, showered, and went to bed, that good mood didn't fade. And the next day at work, he heard unexpected news. His transfer to the department he'd wanted for months had finally been approved. He thought it came out of nowhere. But it was the position he'd wanted so badly. How happy must he have been? He wanted to tell his girlfriend the news right away. He thought he'd take her out for a nice dinner that evening. Maybe make some serious plans for the future. With those thoughts, he finished his day in a good mood and headed home. And while showering, a thought suddenly crossed his mind. What was I planning to do after work today? He couldn't remember at all. He felt like he always met someone for dinner after work, but he couldn't recall their face or name. The next day, he told this to a close coworker sitting next to him, who looked at him strangely and said, "You always went straight home after work. No matter how many times I asked you out for a drink. You said you were tired and left." That's when he realized he'd lost something, and it was some kind of memory. Quite a bit of time passed. The man had postponed his transfer to the desired department but he felt like he was missing something truly important. Still, believing he'd remember someday, he went about his days. A few days later, it rained again. The man found himself, without realizing it, walking down that unfamiliar road again. This time, as he walked that road, his head and steps felt lighter and lighter. It wasn't the overwhelming wave of peace like before, but the whirlwind of emotions settled, and he felt a confidence that he could calmly accept whatever happened. And the next day, he was suddenly promoted at his new department. An unbelievable situation, but he accepted it humbly and with joy, receiving everyone's congratulations. He finished that day safely too. Ring ring. Late at night, a call came from someone. Thinking it was rude to call so late, he answered anyway. Hello? Quote, a woman was crying, calling his name, introducing herself as someone. She asked why he'd suddenly cut off contact, why he couldn't recognize her voice. And rather than explaining, she scolded him. But the man couldn't understand why she was crying, thinking it was a wrong number. He politely hung up. After that day, from time to time, late at night, the same woman would call. Whenever he answered, she was always crying, somehow knowing his name, berating him for abandoning her, pleading and crying. Since it was an unknown number, he had no choice but to answer. But no matter how badly she'd been dumped by a lover with the same name, calling someone else's house repeatedly seemed terribly out of line, he thought. And today too, he hung up the phone and went to bed. And the fourth story is about the people with closed eyes in the photo. This is also a story Naomi told me. Earlier I said Naomi isn't really into ghost stories, right? But weirdly, people like that seem to experience strange things more often. I genuinely love ghost stories, but I've never experienced anything that could be called strange in my life. Anyway, this is something Naomi told me on a day she hadn't even been drinking, with a completely serious face. Ah, this is really strange. I can't explain it. And what she showed me was a group photo, probably taken at school. Looked like a high school graduation photo, taken in front of a ryokan. Everyone wearing the same yukata, smiling brightly. Huh? What's wrong with this? Quote, look closely. Don't you see a few people with their eyes closed? Quote, that's how Naomi's story began. When she first received the photo, everyone was looking at the camera normally, smiling. But a few months later, when Naomi visited her parents' house and happened to look at the photo again, one friend standing at the very end had her eyes closed. At first, she thought it was just a bad shot. That happens sometimes. But the strange thing was, that friend's face looked especially blurry. Only people who knew her could barely recognize her. The photo wasn't blurred or anything. Anyway, it was strange. And a few days later, she heard that friend had died in an accident. At the funeral, to commemorate her friend, they displayed several photos on a screen. including that group photo. But the strange thing was, in that photo, the friend was shown with her eyes open normally. After the funeral, Naomi went back home and checked the photo again. But in her copy, the dead friend still had her eyes closed. Still blurry. That was the starting point. After finishing her first semester, during vacation, Naomi visited her parents' house again, and, remembering what happened, took out the group photo to check. Sure enough, this time, in the middle row, the friend on the left had her eyes closed, but looking at her mouth or cheeks, she was definitely smiling, like someone had photoshopped just her eyes closed. It looked unnatural, she said. A few weeks later, that friend also died in an accident. That's when Naomi became convinced. I don't know why, but the person with closed eyes in this photo dies within days, or weeks at most. Fortunately, after that, no more friends had their eyes closed. Not yet, at least. When I said if it bothers her so much, maybe she should just throw the photo away, Naomi said this. But still, I want to know roughly when I'll die, so I can prepare. Naomi put that photo somewhere clearly visible. She used to keep it deep in a drawer. She said if it caught her eye unnecessarily, it'd bother her more. But at some point, she got too anxious, so she put it in a frame on her desk to look at it every day. Naomi's reasoning was, if I don't check every day, I won't know if someone new has their eyes closed. Honestly, I found that even scarier. More than an attitude of, it won't change anymore. The attitude of, eventually, it will change is terrifying, right? Honestly, I'm scared too. But if I don't look at it, I think I'd be even more scared. At least now, I know it's not my turn yet. Ever since that day, I sometimes ask Naomi about it. Months have passed, but she says it's still the same so far. Thank goodness. She still seems to be doing fine. When I visit sometimes, we go out drinking excitedly. And when I visit her place, the photo is still there as always. Last time I visited, she smiled and said, if someone else closes their eyes again, I'll tell you first. But that smile looked so much like the ones in that cursed photo that it was hard to smile back. Alright, that was it. I really enjoyed reading this myself. And I thought it might feel like a friend telling you these stories directly. So hopefully it felt relatable. Anyway, I need to hurry off to film the next video. So I'll skip the small talk today. To those who joined as members, thank you so much. Please subscribe and like the video. I'd really appreciate it. Eat lots of good food and get plenty of rest. Bye.